What's going on, guys? It's Alex here, and today I'm going to be starting a new knife building project, and this project's going to be a little bit different than the ones I've done in the past, and it's all because of this knife right here. This is a knife that I made several weeks ago. I think it's several weeks ago at this point, and I had a terrible time doing it. Now, some of you may be asking why we keep building kind of the same design or same knife design. You know, with this knife we're not doing anything different. We're still going to be doing the liners and the pins and the lanyard hole, but this knife is going to be larger. But I'm trying to stick with the same design because I'm not super comfortable yet with just doing liners. I had a terrible time with the liners on this knife, and I really wanted to practice that more before I move on to something else. Now I'm going to be kind of making this knife identical to this one, only larger. At least that's the plan. Larger and shaped differently. Same scale material, same pin material and lanyard material. G10 liner. This, I believe, is black paper micarta. So if you're just tuning in for the first time, I just want to thank you for tuning in. If you are familiar with some of my past build videos, this one is going to be a little different in that I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail in this video. I'm also going to be going over some of the mistakes I made making this knife, as I did make a couple of mistakes, in the hopes that I might save you from making some of the same mistakes in your builds. This little Kiradashi I made is pretty awesome. Spray tack. And we've got the lovely beeping in the background. So I'm just cutting out a wood template here to help refine my design. It's much easier to work with wood than metal, especially if you don't have the proper metalworking tools. I can make a wood template in about 5 minutes. To do the same with metal would take much longer. Alright guys, so this is one of the reasons why I think it's important to make a template like this for a knife that you've never made before, at least for me. One thing that I'm noticing so far as I'm kind of shaping this handle, as I'm holding it in my hand, I'm noticing I'm not really liking this palm swell back here. I guess this would be considered a palm swell, whatever it is. It just doesn't feel right. I can notice it pressing into the back of my hand here, and I definitely want to take that down a little bit and help round that off. It does look nice having the knife all symmetrical through here, but it just doesn't feel right. So at least for me, I'm definitely going to be making wood templates from here on out for knives that I've never made before. Okay, so this is much better. I don't have this giant palm swell back here poking into the back of my palm. Fits in my hand real nicely. I'm really happy with the design so far, and yeah, I think now I may be ready to transfer this onto a piece of steel and start cutting. Alright, I think it's time to finally use the old bevel jig. So in case you're wondering, the file jig's working out really nicely. I was going to end up putting a piece of wood back here to keep this thing from moving back and forth and replace these two lag bolts, but I really don't think it's necessary. Honestly, I'm not going to mess with it since it's working. I'm actually really happy with it. It really does help speed the process along and gives you nicer bevels. I definitely think it's worth building one of these if you're thinking about it. Alright, so I think it's time to mark out my holes here. Last time, or the last couple of times, I've just been eyeballing these, but with this knife, I definitely think I want to measure them and get them all in line or relatively close. I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to do 2 pins or if I'm going to add 3 pins in a lanyard hole. I got a pair of broken calipers and that's what I'm going to try and use to lay these holes out. Should I add a 3rd one? Yeah, maybe we'll do a 3rd hole just because. This is 3/16, the brass rod that I'm using. So I'm going to do these, the pin holes first, and then I'll do the lanyard hole. So real quick, a mistake I've almost made a bunch of times now is drilling the wrong size holes in the wrong places. An example of this would be drilling the lanyard hole where the pins would go. Definitely don't want to do that. Just going to double check again, make sure we're drilling the right holes in the right places. Something that's probably a good idea is to use different size drill bit for the lightning/epoxy holes. That way you don't accidentally epoxy the pins in the wrong holes. Again, I've almost done this a couple times now, and the more variables you can remove, the better off you'll be. I decided to countersink all of the holes in the tang. I guess the thinking is that this provides a place for the epoxy to pull and kind of lock everything in place. Other than that, I can't really think of a reason to do this. If you happen to know of another reason, let me know. I stuck this magnet on here to help give me a better grip, but it looks like what it's doing is all the little pieces that are coming off or sticking to the blade. It's actually keeping my sandpaper clean. Look at my hands. So after sanding to a 220 grit finish, I decided to heat treat. First thing I did was normalize the steel. This is done by heating to about 1600 degrees Fahrenheit and then allowing to air cool. This is generally done 3 times, and that's exactly what I did, but I'm only going to show it once because it's all the same. This completely resets the grain structure inside the steel. Now it's time for the quench. I'm quenching in canola oil heated to about 140 degrees. Honestly, I'd like to get my hands on some formulated quenching oil, as I hear it does give superior results, giving you a harder quench. After quenching, I tempered at 400 degrees in my home oven. I did 2 2-hour cycles, and here's what the blade looked like after tempering. So when you're working with liners, one thing you absolutely want to do is prep the surface as well. I used 120 grit sandpaper and gave everything a scrub, then went all the way down to 24 grit. You really can't have a rough enough surface when using epoxy. This also extends to the scales as well. Nice and rough, you have to give the epoxy something to bite onto. And this time I decided to pre-epoxy the liners to the scales. This makes life so much easier. To prep everything for glue up, I washed everything in plain water several times, then I allowed everything to dry completely. This particular epoxy will bond to wet surfaces, but the bond strength isn't nearly as strong, so drying is probably recommended. After drying, I wiped everything off with rubbing alcohol to remove any oil from the fingers, then I applied the epoxy to all the surfaces. This epoxy needs to set for about 10 hours before working, so this is a good place to stop the video. We will pick this build up again in part 2. Now you're definitely going to want to tune in to part 2 as I discover some interesting things about epoxy and what not to do with it when building knives. Also, I almost ruined the scales from not paying attention, and at this point, the very second I'm editing this video, I haven't even finished the knife yet, so I have no idea how it's going to turn out. I still may ruin it completely. Now I know some of you may not like the idea of splitting builds up into 2 different parts. The reality is this helps keep the videos from being stolen and uploaded to Facebook. If you want to know more about that, click that little thing up in the right hand corner. We have a lot of interesting stuff going on in the next video, so tune in next time to see what happens. Okay, seriously, I'll see you in part 2.